the 5 truths about humans that unlock, job performance.
Yeah, I'll give them.
Can we go through those, or we got time to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll give you the quick version. So one we've already talked about. Things are only good or bad by comparison.
Okay.
Right? So if you're a business owner, the truth is you have to understand, how does your team define great? But more important than for your team, you have to know for Ricardo, for Tim, for Paul, for Nancy, right? For Mary, how did they get their definition of great? What's great performance? What is quality? We all have a standard. And so if you're going to be successful in leading people, you have to know, where did they get their standard of great? You can make your job easier by, one, hiring people whose standard of great is equal to yours or what you're going to need in the job. But you definitely have to know how they got it. And some of that, comes from how we grew up. Where did we grow up? I remember the first time I walked into a home that was more than 6,000 square feet. I thought I had walked into a castle, right? Because I just hadn't been exposed to it. I grew up, very low income. It wasn't a world I lived in. And we have to appreciate, where did our employees come from and what is great to them? So you can have if you're a cleaning company, you could have a standard of clean, and your employee might they might think something's really clean that you view as dirty, just inherently based on where they came from. What did they grow up with as a standard of clean? So in every aspect of performance, good or bad by comparison, got to know what it is for individual employees. I remember hearkening back to the cult days, I knocked on thousands of doors trying to convert people for religion. I won't do that today. I'm past it. But I walked up to this, I walked into this trailer park, and there was this dingy, wore-down trailer. I mean, the door was paper thin, the windows were broke, dirt yard. And I grew up poor, and this looked really poor. And I remember thinking in my mind, this person has to be completely miserable. And so I knock on the door, and the door just sort of, almost falls apart. And the lady answers the door, and I say, how are you doing? And I'm expecting, this is going to be something negative. And she starts crying, and she says, I am so grateful. I finally have a yard for my kids to play in, and I got and she goes on and on. This is the best thing. And I felt like a heel. But it was a powerful lesson to me. Things are only good or bad by comparison. And she was judging that world that she was in by the world that she had come from and what she had escaped. And your employees are exactly like that. So you want to keep an employee good or bad by comparison, know what they're comparing it to. An error many business owners make is, it's been so long since they've been in that role, they forget what it's like to be there, or maybe they've never been there. Right? They've never lived the life their person has. Truth number 2, people are already giving 100% of what they believe they're capable of, or they have a reason they believe is valid for not doing so. Mm-mm. And most business owners, right, they'll label people and say they're lazy, or you can't find good help. The truth is, people are already giving you 100% of what they're capable of, or they have a valid reason for not doing so. Valid to them doesn't mean it's universally valid, but they can say, hey, the company just doesn't, they don't pay well enough. Good quality work goes unnoticed.
The one I hear all the time nowadays is work-life balance, and that's a higher priority than the money and the work.
Yeah. So
not universally, but a lot of it.
Yeah. And so I challenge business owners to, when they're having a performance issue with somebody, if they start with the belief, this person's giving me 100% of what they're capable of, or they have a valid reason for not doing so. So it's either a training issue, or they're just not capable of it, or there's something going on where they're letting themselves off the hook, right? You can see this if you take it outside of the business world. You can have people who say, hey, I'm a great husband, I'm a great father, but they can miss their wife's anniversary, they cannot show up their kid's soccer game, and they let themselves off the hook. They have a valid reason. Well, I'm working really hard because I need to be the provider, and your employees do the same thing. They're letting themselves off the hook, giving you 100% for a reason that feels valid to them. So you just have to figure out what that is. And, those two, good or bad by comparison, and people are giving 100%, those very closely related. The third thing, truth is that people love autopilot. They love autopilot. Think about you're driving somewhere, you get home from the airport, you can drive all the way home. You're not even thinking about, the light you stopped at, the traffic next to you, and somehow you get there safely. And our employees, people get on autopilot. And so your customer success rep, they're answering the phone on autopilot. They're not even really thinking about, what it is they're saying. They're answering emails on autopilot. Sometimes you as the owner are interacting in a very mechanical, structured way with your employees. You're not going to overcome that, but you can use it to your benefit. If people love autopilot, use systems thinking to how can I design this so that the autopilot response, like what they do on autopilot, is actually what I need them to do. And then second to that, when it's important they come off of autopilot, how do I get them to do that? So when you have all your employees come into a meeting, I guarantee you many of them are on autopilot. They've sat through this weekly meeting a lot of weeks, and they're probably checked out. But you could use some system design to make them come off autopilot. Maybe I'm changing locations. I have music playing that I didn't have playing last time. I have food this time. You have to switch it up so that they're off autopilot. Something's different, right? It's a way of thinking about your business. We always think about automating processes, but think about automating people, because people love autopilot. And familiarity is what causes autopilot. Think about, though, if you are doing that familiar drive, right, home from the airport, you're on autopilot, and all of a sudden a police officer, lights are behind you. What happens?
You're off.
You come off autopilot. And now you can't hardly hold your speed and things that were natural. And so, but you can create things like that, not in a judgment way with your employees, but you can create moments. The reason you come off autopilot is because even though you think you're a great driver, now somebody's in a position to judge how you're doing. And there's a consequence related to it. And so you can create that inside of your company without being a police officer, where people know they have to come off of autopilot. So as an example, for sales team meetings, I have a ritual in every company I've ever run, which is when we start the sales meeting, nobody says start. The person to my right, they have a check-in. It's scripted. I had X number of calls this week. I closed X dollars of business. I had committed to this. I'm this far ahead or behind my quota. And we go all the way around the room. As the leader, I don't say, hey, that's great. You had a great week, or hey, you need to pick it up. There's no comment on that. What does that do? Well, one, they have to show up and they have to know their numbers, which is really important, right? If you don't know your numbers, you're not going to be successful. But second, people are intuitive enough. They know as they're going around the room, they're like, well, I might suck, but I don't suck that bad compared to him. And they also hear, they also hear what the other person's doing. So that when they've been letting themselves off the hook that, hey, he just got lucky on this deal, or he closed more business, or she did this, they actually hear all of the work that went into it, how many calls they made, how many follow-ups, how many quotes are in the system, good or bad by comparison, right? They're definitely coming off an autopilot in that meeting because they're a little uncomfortable. They're coming to confession. But the way I keep it from being judgmental is I'm absolutely forbid myself as the leader from making any comment. It's not good or bad, it just is. And we can deal with what is, if that makes sense. Oh, really powerful. Sure. If you don't have a rhythm check-in, in my book I call sacred rhythms. That's one of my sacred rhythms. We never change it, right? It happens every time. You know it's going to happen, and your team won't fight sacred rhythms. What they'll fight is when you all of a sudden put something in place that didn't used to be there. But once it becomes a rhythm, they just get used to it. New employees come in and they go, oh, that's just the way it is. We check in our numbers. It's not meant to humiliate me, but this is how we get better, right?
Yeah.
And then the number 4 is people need to belong. And notice I'm saying they need to belong, not that they want to belong. They need to belong. And so you have to find a way to make them belong. How do people belong? One is sacred rhythms. So when you finally get into a group and you sort of know what's coming next, and right, you know the tune, like all of a sudden you feel like you belong. Also insider language. So when you get into an industry and you know all their acronyms and you know there's this insider languages, religion's really good about that. Insider language tells people they belong. So as an example, you could name your conference rooms different, names, and people will come in the first time they have no idea why the meeting's named that way or the room's named that way. They're going to ask somebody's going to tell them the story. Oh, that was after our founder that did X, Y, Z. And now they feel like they're an insider because they know the history or they know the stories. Yeah. They become a part of it. Another way is rituals. So if you have rituals, that makes people belong. Think about when you go to Thanksgiving dinner with your family, if you do that, right? There's a ritual. Like there's always the person that does this and there's the person that takes this, and you instantly come in and you may not have seen them for months, and you automatically, so what are the rituals you're going to have in your organization? The one I gave you about check-in at a meeting, that's a ritual for us. We just do it. It's always happens, right? So people are used to that. And people will change their behavior based upon needing to belong. And you and I are the same way. Think about two different restrooms that you might go into. I bet you didn't think we'd talk about restrooms. But if you go into a nice restaurant, and the napkins are piled up high, everything's polished, surface is there, maybe there's even a guy standing there handing out mints, and you wash your hands in that sink, you don't even think about like shaking your hands off, right? And shooting for the wastebasket, or like you wipe it down because it's all nice and neat like that. But you go to a stadium bathroom, sports game, right? It's messy. You have no problem shaking your hands off in that sink and trying to make the 3-point shot for the wastebasket. And if it doesn't make it, well, maybe I will or won't pick it up. We just shift, right? And so when people come into your business, they need to belong. If your office is dirty and you allow people to show up late, like they're gonna, even your superstar is gonna shift. And so you need to forensically go into your business and say, what standard am I setting? What if people have to do substandard work in order to fit in, that's what they're going to do. They're going to feel pressured by the other technicians not to show them up, not to make them look bad. So you have to have a culture where to fit in, you have to be striving for excellence. Like if you have an office environment where health and fitness and self-improvement is sort of the tone, and that's why people showed up, because you wrote a great ad that described that. When people show up, they have to see that. And then they're going to, if they're not there, they're going to start being there. If you ask somebody every week, hey, what book did you read this week? Yeah. They're probably going to say, oh, I didn't read a book. You ask them that 6 weeks in a row, eventually they're going to read a book because they're tired of saying they don't read. And then the final one's really easy, is the only reason that matters are their reasons. Mm. And almost always as an owner, we come from it for our reasons. And every conversation coaching has to come from their reasons. Like, why did you take this job? What are you dreaming of? What do you want to do? Tommy Mello does really good at this. He was both my client. Now he's an investor in our company as well. And he does really good job at helping people. He actually hires a dream manager that meets with his employees and finds out what do they want to accomplish. So if they want to buy a home, he helps them with that, helps them get the credit coaching they need, helps them set up a savings plan, checks in with them to make sure that's happening. If they want to get some credential, he's going to help them do that. If he wants to take their family on the vacation. But by approaching that way, he has made his people bulletproof from getting picked off by competition. Hmm. It's just not going to happen.
That number 5, the only reason that matters is theirs, 100%. And the other most interesting thing that you've said so far, that maybe we have you on again and talk about it, but they give you 100% or they have a reason why they don't. My issue with lots of people I talk to is a lot of times people have reasons that they don't. I'll give you an example. In a Facebook group in an industry that I'm familiar with, somebody was on there saying, new person, recent college graduate, I don't like 40 hours. What's with 40 hours? I only want to work 32. That's literally what they said. And the response to that just went on for pages and pages in support. Right? So in the practicality of it, that's what matters. It's their their view of the world.
Why do they want to work 30? So here's what a skilled leader.
Oh, good.
Here's what a skilled leader would do. One, you have a standard for your company. So if it's 40 hours, it's 40 hours. So I'm not suggesting you necessarily shift your company. But what I'd be more interested in is why 32 hours? I mean, why not 24 hours? Why not 8 hours?
Hey,
right? But
every question you're asking, go ahead.
I want to engage in that conversation because they have a reason why 32 hours seems good to them. And frankly, if I was a business owner and somebody wanted to work 32 hours, I'd let them work 32 hours, but I would understand their reason why. And and they would have to understand that they need to deliver to me the results that I need out of that position. Time is irrelevant for most positions. Yeah. And if I need to pay them less and they only work 32 hours, but they outperform all my, low performers, I'm actually pretty happy with that. I think employers of the future especially are going to have to be flexible. And this isn't because people say, this generation doesn't want to work. It's not true. This generation works really hard and they're really smart. They just don't want to work for you. They don't want to be you. They don't want to see their life. They don't see their life path the way you saw your life path. So you got to get over it as an employer. If you want great performance, like when they're passionate about something, they're going to work endlessly and hard for it. The challenge is they're just not passionate, and you're not tapping into that passion for you. That's your job. You're asking them to build your business. And the more traditional mindset is that they should be grateful they have a job. In principle, I would agree with that. But that's no longer the truth. I mean, they get online nonstop and they're bombarded with work for yourself and have a side hustle and do this. And, that mental makeup of where they came from is completely different. That's where you go into things are only good or bad by comparison. In this case, the employer's calling that bad because they're comparing it to what they were used to when people were willing to work 60 hours and the job was the only thing. But that is no longer the reality for people.
I'm 100% with you on that. And although I'm an older person, I'm open. I mean, I want to understand. Where we bump up against it is, you said as long as they perform in 32 hours, okay, great. Well, there are jobs that require the presence of a person.
Yeah, so that job wouldn't be for them. I'll just have a frank conversation. This job isn't for you. It's a 40-hour job, and here's the reason why. I can't accommodate you. Like, I have a help desk, right, or a CSR role where we have to answer the phone for 40 hours.
Right.
Like, that's the job.
Be there.
Yeah.
And there are others where
I might consider, though, even in a job like that, is there a way that I could design the team where people that wanted to work 60 hours a week could work 60 hours a week, and those that wanted to work 32 worked 32? Like, at the end of the day, when you're trying to get the best people and you're trying to have them stick with you the longest, that mental flexibility of thinking through how to make that happen becomes really important. You're seeing companies have this with people saying, I only want to work from home. I don't want to come back to the office. And they're sort of rigid in that. You could say, screw it. You got to come into the office or you're not going to work for me. That's one approach. I would suggest you're going to have a wider access to talent if you're willing to at least have the conversation about how do I construct this in a way that, because then once you've done that, employee doesn't easily want to go somewhere else because they realize that you care about what their life looks like. Right. So like I have an employee now that she's really my right arm, does, checks my email, scheduled this call. Like I can hardly live without her, without being overwhelmed. She's on a 3-day vacation. She messaged me last night and said, hey, I can in the morning and evenings get this organized for you, which I would love. But my response to her was absolutely not. I'm going to manage. You're on vacation. I know I'm going to suffer the next 3 days. Like it's going to be hard. However, the payoff for her and our relationship is going to be way better because I was willing to take the punch instead of rob that time from her. I can never have my quality of life be more important to me than the quality of life of my people. Like if I'm going to ask my people to build the company of my dreams, I've got to serve them.